Are we live? We're live. How's it going, guys? Tonight, we are going to go deep into the subject of entheogens, plant medicine, consciousness. As some of you guys might already know, I got interested in plant medicines specifically very, very early due to a chance encounter with a book called Flowering Plants that was misplaced in my elementary school library, or possibly, some impish hippie teacher might have stuck it in there on purpose. I don't know. But yeah, I became fascinated with these things from a very early age because I already had a predisposition to be interested in the esoteric and metaphysical and whatnot. And this book had a lot of the folklore around plants like datura and mandrake and ayahuasca. And so that really had a lot to do with it catching my attention. But it wasn't long until I figured out that they were a gateway to a different type of consciousness. And I stumbled into the books of Timothy Leary, Robert Anton Wilson, Terence McKenna. In junior high, I believe I started reading Leary in junior high. And it kind of made me feel like I wasn't alone in the world anymore, particularly Leary. It was the first time that I had seen another human being that I felt really thought like I did. How's it going? It was really a tremendous blessing for me to stumble across these people. And so, that brings us to our current place, I guess, in history. When I was getting involved in all of these things, they were much more demonized, way more illegal. In fact, when I got busted in, I guess, 10th grade, it was a big deal, They charged me with conspiracy to run a continual criminal enterprise, and they really were out for blood. I mean, it was bad. It could have been really, really bad. Luckily, it didn't turn out that way. Point being, the authorities have kind of backed off. Research has increased dramatically. It's all a really good thing to see. At the same time, there are some sort of negative consequences of all that. And they're not particularly negative at the moment, but I have some concerns about where it could go. For one thing, psychedelics could be used as a tool to create more homogeneity in society, rather than creating more iconoclasts and outliers and sovereign individuals who have a strong sense of identity. This is the direction that I believe we should be headed in socially, culturally. And I've seen a lot of evidence also that people are trying to kind of spin the psychedelics to try to make, a more content office worker, people microdosing mushrooms in order to go to work and type faster or something, Things can go a bit awry in that sense. And then also I have become aware of pharmaceutical companies trying to engineer medicines that are based on psychedelics, but that have no psychedelic effect. This is a tremendous mistake. And this is also the kind of thing that could result in sort of a road to hell paved with good intentions kind of scenario, where psychedelics, a large part of their capacity for liberating the consciousness of people and healing their traumas and giving them that bird's eye view of the universe, which allows you to relate to it in a way that allows you to better settle into your place relative to it. When you take the transcendental experience out of psychedelics, all you have is a compound that is going to catalyze neurogenesis and enhance neuroplasticity, and that may have some benefits, right? Because the brain has the capacity to wire itself in the way that it needs to. All of the systems in nature tend towards homeostasis. So there very likely would be some benefits in that. However, there's tremendous danger of making automatons out of people by doing this, because this transcendental experience that psychedelics induce in people, I think, is actually a more holistic experience of consciousness in general. It is a glimpse at the wiring under the board. It is an integration into the universal mind to an extent and temporarily. And this is what gives people direction, and it has a sort of guiding capacity. You know, when you merge with that larger consciousness, it's not random, it's the essence of intelligence. And excising that from the psychedelic experience, I don't think it's good. Let me check in with the chat real quick. How's it going, Athena? Max Miller, what's up? By the way, this is an AMA, you guys, so if you have questions or subjects that you would like me to weigh in on, please put them in the chat. Also, we have space still, and I'm going to add another event, I think, in Manu for probably February. But for now, we have November 11th in Manu. Space is open, and also in the Sacred Valley, but not for much longer, maybe 3 weeks. So you'd have to jump on a plane and come right down if you're coming to the Sacred Valley. Also, please hit the like button, share, subscribe. We are demonetized, so all of our support comes from Patreon. And if you do not follow me on Substack, you should get over to Substack. Even if you don't want to follow me, go there, because it's a great platform full of brilliant, open-minded, forward-thinking people. So if that's what's good. All right, so where were we with this discussion of psychedelics? I mean, there's so many places to go with it. Let me see if anybody popped a question in the chat. No? All right. So one thing that I get a lot from people is, you know, because I cover the sort of hermetic Western mystery occult tradition a lot, but also psychedelics. And people will often ask or even comment against, like, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn generally advises against using entheogens in combination with magical practices. This is utterly ridiculous for a couple of reasons. One of those reasons is that's what shamanism is, really. You know, ayahuasqueros, huachimeros, the peyote roadman, you know, and even the traditions in Europe, there is use of poison path plants like mandrake, scopolamine. Well, you know, that's what's in the mandrake. Datura, you know, all of these nightmares experiences. But even crazier than that, the Western mystery tradition was a shamanic tradition. And this is one of the reasons that I get so, my cackles are raised or whatever, you know, when I hear about Christian Hermeticism, right? Because it's the influence of those folks that has degraded and disenfranchised the mystery traditions from their roots, their psychedelic roots, right? The kykeon in ancient Greece at the Eleusinian Mysteries. This was a psychoactive beverage. There were mystery schools and pre-Incan civilizations that taught all the same things as the Western mystery schools, and they used psychedelic plants. So just wanted to throw that out there, because this is something that I get a lot. I would say also it depends on the kind of ritual magic you're doing, you know, and you don't want to jump into this kind of thing without proper preparation. You know, that kind of goes without saying. But I do think that there is a much higher chance of sort of overloading your brain. Even if you just consider magical ritual practices psychological exercises, when you have all of your circuits open and you have a different ratio of connectivity in regions of the brain and whatnot, and you start screwing around with manipulating the subconscious, you had better know what you're doing, you know. But beyond that, entheogens and occult practices go together like butt cheeks. It's a natural combination. Whatever we can do to accelerate our transmutation the transmutation of our inner being safely, you know, is good. And I think that combining ritual magic with psychedelics is like throwing gas on fire. It's just going to accelerate your progress. However, when you are riding a bicycle leisurely, whatever, in a leisure fashion, and you wreck, you might get a scraped knee or, whatever. But if you are driving a Lamborghini at 230 miles an hour and you wreck, you're going to die. So, risk versus reward, guys. Hola. Okay. Yeah, I still don't see any questions or subjects that you guys would like me to. Oh, by the way, you guys, go to illuminosis.com and check it out. We have different things that, you can read between the lines. This is that kind of live stream. And if you're interested in one of the retreats, you can fill out a contact form, or consultation. You can fill out a contact form and get a hold of us. So I guess, where we're at with the culture at large and the influence of psychedelics, the potential of psychedelics, trying to gauge the kind of impact that they've had so far. All of those things are difficult tasks. I have recently discovered that the algorithm, I mean, it's not like I didn't know this, but I've been able to prove it more, I guess is what I'm saying, is really sort of distorting our view of what's happening culturally. It's actually Substack, I have to thank for that, because it's given me a window that didn't exist before. And on platforms like YouTube and Facebook and other more heavily controlled platforms, I don't see other people like me around because the algorithm hides us from each other. I really do believe that. Because when I went to Substack, all of a sudden there's tons of people, and the difference is just the algorithm is not biased and it's not under control of centralized powers. At least that's how it appears, right? So I've had to kind of adjust my perception of the impact that psychedelics have had, because I was very thoroughly disappointed looking around social media, in general. And now I realize that there are a whole lot of people whose consciousness has indeed been catalyzed. And we're not talking about crystal crunching New Agers with wind whistling between their ears because they're so open-minded that reason and common sense has flown the coop, right? People that are still grounded in reason and science and understand that, for example, the universe operates upon mechanisms, period, the end. Impossible things don't happen. That's not what magic is. That's not what spirituality is. It's not about overriding natural law and transcending space and time and moving into a 5D reality. None of that shit is real, at least not now. And that is exactly the mutation that we are looking to see. And there is zero chance that that wasn't largely catalyzed by psychedelics. So that is a wonderful thing to see. We still have some impediments to overcome. In the interest of respect for tradition, a lot of things are being promoted and are almost like ubiquitously held beliefs in certain subcultures that I think actually are obstructing development and hindering progress. One of the things that we do as humans is we realize that we have been in a box, and we realize that that represents a lot of limitations, that we don't want to be there. And so we climb out of that box and right into another box. And in a lot of cases, that has to do with, or the result is ayahuasca plug earrings, dreadlocks, vegan diet, and it's still a tremendous amount of smugness and ego. And, the real goal is obscured uh, to an extent by the trappings of the trends, I guess. Does that make sense? You know, it's like when there are all these superficial things that are associated with something, rather than actually doing the deep work and transformation, you can sort of lean into all of these superficial things and have an identity that is only skin deep. And it's very easy to convince yourself when you look in the mirror that the thing you're looking at, if it's the correct image, means that you are that thing. Walks like a duck, talks like a duck, quacks like a or walks like a duck, swims like a duck, quacks like a duck. Not in this world, kids. So, there are limitations and there are skill sets that are required to really make investitures of psychedelic experiences. You can't just drink ayahuasca a lot. I've met lots of people that, this is my 375th ceremony, and like that's just all they do. And they become like critics of like Icaros and stuff, like um, that's kind of odd. Like if you're getting all this healing done, why do you need 400 ceremonies in only 2 years? If it had been 10 years, maybe okay. But if you're not a facilitator or a shaman, then what is the purpose of this? What could you possibly need to vomit up still? Um, the reality is that you have to have proper preparation. And this is a really interesting subject, actually, because it's something that's almost totally overlooked, like in the industry, I guess you would say, right? Everyone talks about integration after the fact, but nobody talks about the necessity for preparation before the fact. And the reason for that, of course, is profit motive. You don't want to tell people you need to wait 2 years and you need to go learn how to do self psychoanalysis. You need to learn the basic framework of psychology. You got to learn critical thinking and reason. Like you have to develop objectivity towards self. You need to, all of these things that really make what we used to call an initiate, to make someone viable for initiation. When you were prospecting, I guess that's how they say it in a gang, motorcycle gang, but when you were prospecting for the Elizanian Mysteries, it was 3 years that you had to prove yourself, that you had to learn, that you had to condition your mind, that you had to make your make fertile ground in your being to plant the seeds of entheogenic influence. If you were going to become a shaman for the Shuar, it's 2 years with no meat or sex. Some people have 3-year deals. There are a lot of different situations, but none of it is a 2-week dieta. You know what I mean? That's not it. And so, when I see people talking about how they want to understand the universe, they want a deeper relationship with the universe, and that's why they're drinking ayahuasca and taking psychedelics. And I want to hand them a book on physics and say, well, if you really want to understand the universe, here you go. Don't be intellectually lazy. If you expand your consciousness without, how do you say, without creating a counterbalance of worldly knowledge, right? You're just blowing a balloon up. It's not. It's not going to do much but make you more of what you are, which can be helpful. you know. But it really is true that if you're going to change your consciousness, then you have to make other behavioral adaptations as well. Otherwise, you're imbalanced and lopsided, you know, and that is something that is running rampant right now, you know, because it's really easy to convince yourself that just taking the psychedelics, you're noticing changes in your cognition, the way that you feel, you know, the way that you experience things. And it's easy to tell yourself that that's enough. But what that ultimately leads to is, you know, lack of discernment in spiritual matters, which is dangerous, to put it mildly. Um, that made me think of another aspect of this, you know, with the depression thing. I meant to talk about this earlier when we were discussing pharmaceuticals and how they're trying to engineer psychedelics that aren't psychedelic and all of that kind of thing. You know, when they look at the biochemical reasons, the neurological mechanisms that underlie relief from depression and PTSD and anxiety and all of these things. This is another reason that taking the psychedelic out of psychedelics is just stupid. I mean, what is the point, anyways? You know, I guess they're thinking that it will cause like a schizophrenic or it will allow someone that is maybe schizophrenic or some other contraindicated condition to partake in these things and benefit from them. Which, you know, is reasonable, except that I've seen schizophrenic people take ayahuasca and get plenty of benefit. I did not allow that, but people don't always tell you things, honestly. Um, and you find out later, you know. Yeah, but what I'm saying is that the alleviation of depression that is the result of entheogenic experience has to do with the fact that you have a purpose now. You know, being in the mystery is our source of inspiration. You know, you are fascinated, you are intrigued, you are immersed in possibility, in recognition of miracles, synchronicities increase, a feeling of serendipity and magic and possibility emerges in your being in a way that you have never experienced before. Now you're engaged in the process of life. And that is not because psychedelics have caused some enhancement of neuroplasticity or catalyzed some neurogenesis. It is because you have had an experience of the transcendental, an experience of the recognition of the universal mind, you know? And I also think that there are other levels of benefit to this. The visionary part of psychedelics, those patterns that we see floating in the air that look like they're made of tiny little lines of light, I don't think that those are hallucinations. I don't think that they're projected by the brain. You know, if a psychedelic experience was a response to disorder and chaos and hallucination, it would not result in a positive, orderly reconfiguration of the being of the person that has consumed them. That doesn't add up to me. You know, I suspect that although they say that pupillary mydriasis, with the expansion of pupils, dilation of pupils, is due to just a serotonin response in the brain, right? Okay, that's one level of it, sure. But once those pupils are open, I suspect that you're processing a wider bandwidth of light, a wider bandwidth of the spectrum, and there's different types of information that are carried by different types of light, right? So that in and of itself, we have no idea when I'll give you an example actually of something ayahuasca told me, right? I was having like just nonsense visions for the first, 6 experiences or something. They were bright and, clear, but they didn't make any sense. And there were no like entities. It was just gobbledygook and weird random images and stuff. And at one point, I was staring at this. It looked like the Scooby Doo van that they were always chiefing out in, and but as if it was drawn by like a super or a postmodern Japanese, like, you know what I mean, just weird ayahuasca version of the Scooby Doo van. And I'm looking at this thing. It's not moving, even driving. It's just there, you know. And I'm like, okay, this is just dumb. Like, what? Yeah. Show me something I can use. You know, I'm tired of all this gobbledygook. And she says, the mind works in symbolic language. Just because you don't consciously understand what's being communicated doesn't mean that nothing is being communicated. And she followed that up with a bunch of insane, like 11-dimensional geometry. And I was like, okay, well, I'm sure this is communicating something to my subconscious. I don't know about the Scooby-Doo van, though. But you know what I mean? These things, these projections, even if they're projections of the subconscious, let's go ahead and play devil's advocate and give the abject materialists, their day in court. Even if that's the case, they're still, just as dreams can be revelatory, just, we don't need to be editing psychedelics, man. What the fuck is wrong with people? The best version of you, I just tried some visual. Hey, Natural State, how you doing? Good to see you. Thank you, Anna. It's good to hear. I've been through too much over the last 6 months or so, but thanks to plant medicine, honestly, once I figured out that I could safely take it again, it's really done a lot to bring me back to myself, But this question about San Pedro, the individual said they didn't get the kind of insights that they do from ayahuasca. You will not get the same kind of insights that you do from ayahuasca. There's a reason why these two things exist, because, although there's some overlap with all psychedelics, the efficacy is fine-tuned to certain applications, right? So ayahuasca tends to help with emotional things. It's interesting because, I guess, because you do get a lot of information about, the future and stuff from ayahuasca. Non-ordinary cognition or transconscious information reception is something I've experienced a number of times with ayahuasca. I'm 100% certain that it's a real thing. But anyways, generally it's about emotional trauma and sort of feminine stuff and water kind of vibes. San Pedro is phallic in shape. It grows in the desert, high, close to the sun. I don't think it's a coincidence that people worship gold, which is light, which is consciousness, in places where there's a lot of San Pedro cactus. The Inca definitely consumed it along with Wilca. But it's a different part of the spectrum. It's the masculine, it's the cerebral, it's the intellectual, but it can also be empathy. It's great for couples, and it's a tremendously powerful aphrodisiac with the added benefit of the spiritual connection level. It's not just like it's an aphrodisiac. It has this, well, it's a phenethylamine, right? Like MDMA. So my guess is that you probably didn't take a lot. If you drink it with a commercial entity, they almost always serve tourist medicine, they call it. In fact, I know one of the most well-regarded San Pedro shaman in Ecuador, and one day he sat beside me on the bus to Cuenca, and he told me, he's like, I serve tourist medicine. I was like, no, I didn't know that, but he's like, I'm not trying to deal with these gringos freaking out for 10 hours. It just lasts way too long. If you do lose somebody over the edge, it's way harder to get them back than it is with ayahuasca. And it can be a long time. I had this problem twice, I guess, where somebody was a bit overwhelmed. It's interesting too, because it was the largest person in the group and everyone else was completely fine with the same amount, not even a little bit close to the edge of anything, So it's interesting how that works. Somebody can be 240 pounds and still be hypersensitive. And delayed onset too. You know, it had been like 3 hours. He said he wasn't really noticing much, and okay, here's a little more. Next thing you know, he's like stark naked, and it was all fine. But man, yeah, that's why though they don't want to deal with it, you know, and I don't blame them really. And if not, yeah, I still think he probably took too little of a dose. If you didn't get the point, that's got to be it. And the problem with really high doses of San Pedro is that it causes blackouts a lot. So you are running around doing stuff, but you're not conscious, and that's dangerous. So, you know, you can't really just drink a bunch of it on your own. You have to have someone there if you're going to have a large dose experience or a high dose experience that can hold you down physically if it becomes necessary, you know. But the high dose experiences are extremely interesting. Invariably, you have an experience where you are a photon in a sea of trillions and trillions and trillions of photons. I mean, you've never seen so many things in one frame in your entire life. Like, it's absolutely mind-boggling. And it's not just an experience that I've had, it's an experience that people just have. It is a medicine of the light. That's what the shamans say. And that appears to be correct. Cactus once showed me how we are like the monad, the individual unit of spirit, is somehow also just a photon. Anyways, I've told that story before. You guys can find it in the last San Pedro stream if you're interested in all the details of that. But yeah, that's all I can really say about that, I guess. No more questions or comments. Huh? Take anything without proper. Let's see what else we got here. I mean, you know, there's also the proper conditioning or metaprogramming. Conditioning is not a very nice sounding word. Metaprogramming protocol. You know, if you're going to go into these experiences with the intent of engineering specific changes, then you need to have a strategy for that. You know, you need to understand how these things work and why they work. And my technique for that is pranayama, fourfold breath. Four is the number of stability. When you're creating a new universe, then you want four legs on the chair that you were about to sit down, on the throne that you were about to seat yourself on, right? So, you know, I know I've explained this a million times on this channel, and a lot of you guys are regulars, so I'll just run through it real quick for anybody that might be new. But basically, I used probably 80 micrograms of LSD and meditative posture, you know, and you breathe in for a 4 count, focusing on the new program that you are wanting to write. And then you hold the breath for a 4 count, focusing on the feelings associated with this positive thing. And then you exhale for a 4 count and kind of imagine yourself expelling like this black, nasty energy and whatever the negative associations that you have with this program. You focus on releasing them, and you have to push all of the air out all the way down to the bottom of your diaphragm, and then keep it distended for 4. And what you're doing is inundating the brain with oxygen while focusing on the new program, while your brain is in a highly neuroplastic state and with more neurogenesis, right? And so it's that oxygen is the fuel it needs to rapidly rewrite habits and shit. And so, but then you are depriving the brain of oxygen, which is moving you into altered states of consciousness, which are also efficacious at destroying bad habits or inculcating new software. You're upgrading your hardware so that you can run better software. And I quit a like 30. Let's see, no. I was 9 when I started, and I was 35 when I. So however many years that is, 26 years or something. I was smoking, pretty much constantly. First thing in the morning. And the day after this, I did not even remember that I was a smoker until I found my pouch of tobacco in my pocket at like 8 o'clock at night or 7:30 at night after we went out to dinner, and I was like looking for my keys, and I was like, "Hey, what the hell? Oh my god!" It was wild. So a powerful, tremendously powerful tool for those kind of applications, especially if you know a few tricks. Tobacco also, proper use of tobacco in conjunction with psychedelics is of great utility. The Shuar tradition that I learned ayahuasca in, they take tobacco, actually several different tribes do this, and it's not just tobacco. Everything is taken in the nose, and it's really brilliant because I don't know why they started doing that, but the reality is that the profile of the alkaloids in the plants is retained better if you put it directly into your nose, because there are metabolic salts and enzymes and various things in your gut that will destroy a lot of these compounds, that react with some of these compounds and turn them into other things. And so you actually get the medicine as it's constituted by nature when you take it through your nose. And so this tobacco, liquid tobacco, taken through the nose in order to focus the mind and to direct the will, it is used as an aid in prayer. The concept basically being that rather than praying to some sky god that may or may not exist, and if it doesn't exist, then you're just sort of, it's like gunpowder lost in the void, you know what I mean? It doesn't have, or steam without a pipe to channel it so that it can drive the train, it's just dispersed into the ether, which is generous of you, but it's not going to serve any purpose. So you want to focus your will on the object of your intention rather than supplicating and prostrating, or supplicating some god, prostrating yourself on the ground. And the tobacco basically focuses it like a laser. You're turning a knob that focuses a beam of light. And it can also be used if you have the presence of mind, during ayahuasca ceremony. When you get into a state or you have some thought or experience that you need to take an energetic snapshot of, you need to freeze it into your being, you take the tobacco at that moment and then you sit with that feeling and it locks it in there. So there's that. Let's see. Meditate for 20 minutes before, during, and after any psychedelic helps. Nice. And I guess while we're on the subject of ayahuasca and healing, there are a number of plants, and I don't want to call them supplements. Calling colloidal gold a supplement seems a little bit demeaning or something. Like it's like divine light, it's ridiculous to call it a supplement. But I've had a fascination with light, gold consciousness, this relationship between them that I've suspected forever and ever. And it's not like it's just my idea. The alchemists talked about this. The Incans knew it. The Mesopotamians, the Babylonians, did I say Egyptians? I can't believe it if I didn't say, you know what I mean? But there's a bunch of the Syrians. In fact, I'm working on a blog right now for Substack that has an entire list of every culture that knew that gold was from stars and that associated with light and consciousness. And it's pretty much every ancient culture on the entire face of the earth. So, for obvious reasons, and I'll actually give you some other bits and pieces, to support that. For example, gold is a superconductor, but superconductors are not superconductive unless they're at their critical temperature, unless they're hit by light. And we have observed photons being emitted from neurons and microtubules in the brain, and there is tons of light in the brain. And so for a long time, certain neuroscientists suspected that there must be superconductors in the brain in order to facilitate the processing of such a tremendous amount of information so rapidly, right? But they said it's too hot and noisy for quantum effects, and also that the superconductors wouldn't be at their critical temperature. Now that we know that light activates gold, actually light and gold have all sorts of weird relationships that are pretty incredible. If you look up the Scrimian bags studies, it has to do with this. I'm not going to try to explain it, but check it out. Where was I at with this? Okay, so you can see how gold would facilitate information, cognition, basically, in the brain. But studies have shown that it does way more than that. It has restored sanity to people that had had psychotic breaks because of syphilis, which is, you're pretty crazy when you have syphilis psychosis. Let's see. Mood, depression. It can positively affect brain cells and drug delivery. Improve memory. I'm reading Google now. There is strong evidence that it can directly improve memory, focus, cognitive clarity. But then if you go on to like the National Institute of Health, neurological diseases, because they modulate inflammatory response, reduce oxidative stress, and promote neural survival and regeneration of the ischemic brain. It has significantly reversed multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's disease. It has reversed brain damage in the brains of mice that was caused by obesity, and on and on and on and on and on. I mean, I could go on and on and on. It's really insane how much gold can do for you. And you know why that makes sense to me? First of all, bioelectricity. If you know Michael Levin, then you understand the effect that our fields have on our cellular health and development, and even their morphological destiny, I guess, Yeah, so there's that. But also on a deeper level, if gold is truly light and all matter is light in a standing wave, then there is nothing more fundamentally of the essence of health and being and life than gold, except for maybe light, right? But gold is like really, really condensed light, like fucking. I mean, can you imagine how many photons it would take to make a ounce of gold? And also most of the gold comes from neutron stars that are so dense that a spoonful weighs as much as Kilimanjaro. They're only 115 yards across on average, and they rarely collide, but when they do, they spray gold and platinum and copper and heavy elements all over the goddamn universe. And so, yeah, there's that. I thought I had something else to say about this. Oh, and of course, you guys already know about lion's mane and niacin and all this kind of stuff. Kashiru also is very beneficial, and we do have that on our website. If you don't know about Kashiru, you should find out. I have a video on my channel called Andean Superfood Salad, but it contains cytotoxins that inhibit the division of tumor cells, so they cannot replicate, they cannot grow, which is very helpful. Did we get the golden light thing all the way done? Yeah, I guess we got through that satisfactorily. Are mantras effective? What do you mean are mantras effective? Effective at what? you know? Any repetition of a vibratory signature with sufficient focus is capable of catalyzing change in an individual, you know? It's not something I'm an expert in. I haven't studied mantras. I don't, that's not my game. But I do know the power of sound, and I know the power of repetition and patterns. So yeah, I mean, I would say that they probably would be, but it's also going to depend upon the technique and the intention and the capacity of the individual doing it. Yeah, just like anything else. Well, guys, I'm not seeing a ton of questions flooding in here, and I have said, I guess, my piece. So please hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron. If you're interested in a retreat, shoot me an email. Don't forget to go to our website. I appreciate each and every one of you. My partner is actually going to be on soon because she has gotten into this human design system. And it's actually pretty impressive, I have to say. I am not the biggest fan of astrology, except that it's not that I don't think that it could be real. It's just that every school from every culture around the planet throughout history has had a different interpretation of what it all means. So whose do you believe, And there are certain things like Mercury goes into retrograde. I know it, you know what I mean? Like the last 7 times that I've suspected that Mercury was in retrograde, I checked and it was, I mean, I'm not, you know what I mean? I'm not discounting it. That's not the point. But generally, I am skeptical, I guess. And human design incorporates like Kabbalistic elements and other influences. And its ability to profile people is extraordinary. Everything I've seen so far matches with such specificity that I can't find any flaw, honestly. And I would if I could, and I can't. So I won't. Well, then don't. But yeah, she's going to be on, and she is doing readings for people, and I honestly never thought that I would be promoting readings of any kind, but, it's apparently valid, so I support it. So thank you guys so much, and I'll see you Tuesday.